All right, it's Q&A time. I haven't done this in a really long time, and I let my Patreon supporters ask whatever they liked. It's not that many questions, which is good because that means I can focus more on each individual one. So let's just go right into it. So I'll go by the order in which the comments here are displayed. So first one, what do you think about Glock guns? Do you have one? I'm an officer in Austria and we use the G17 for duty. So I doubt that there are many people who are still sticking around from the old days of my channel. You know, back when I had like 1,500 or 2,000 subscribers, something like that, in 2008 or 9. If any of you are still around, you may remember the issues that I had with a particular firearm. So I wanted to go for the most reliable thing, just to be on the safe side. So I didn't go with what I personally like the most in terms of aesthetics and handling and all of that. I just went by what people thought, and lo and behold, the Glock. Of course, there are many fans of the Glock, and everybody said, yeah, this is the most reliable thing ever. And so I looked at it and was like, okay, I guess so. So I bought a Glock 35. I wanted the longer barrel because I was doing precision shooting at the time. I really didn't like the ergonomics. I know that for a lot of people it's just fine. This one was one of the earlier models that didn't have the interchangeable back straps yet, so I was stuck with the grip that it came with, and there was something about that angle and the way it kind of swelled towards the end. It was extremely uncomfortable in my hands. I did not like the way it felt whatsoever. It also kind of amplified the recoil. The 40, it was chambered in 40, and it is kind of, 40 Smith & Wesson is somewhat snappy, and that grip made it worse. It just wasn't a fun one to shoot whatsoever. However, just recently, in fact a couple of days ago, Kara and I encountered this at a thrift store, of all things, and this is a 22. It's made by what's again, ISSC in Austria. It's the M22. So very Glock-like. It's not the exact same thing. It's for one, it's not a striker fire pistol, but it's actually got a hammer, as you can see there in the back. So this totally surprised me because this fits my hand perfectly. No trouble with it whatsoever. I do think it has a slightly different shape here in the end. I mean, it is very, very similar to a Glock, but you know, there are some minor differences, and apparently that's enough. I do not have an issue with this one. And I had so far only had one chance to shoot it briefly, just a couple of rounds through it just to try it out, and yeah, it works. I had 2 cases where it didn't go off, but that was just, 22 being the unreliable rimfire ammo that it is. And the nice thing with this is if it just goes click, you can cock the hammer and try again, and that did it in both cases. So yeah, otherwise sights not bad. It's kind of a standard Glock style sights where you have the white marking in the back and the dot in the front. Well, it's actually a white square, but either way. So yeah, oddly enough, this one I have no trouble with. But yeah, on to the next question. What have we got here? What is your favorite fantasy sword? So what's your favorite realistic fantasy sword, and what's your favorite unrealistic fantasy sword? This I had to look up because I couldn't think of too much that I like. Now, for one, as I mentioned before, my memory is dubious. But yeah, I was looking around, trying to think, any, games I've played, movies I've watched, etc., pictures I've seen. And a lot of the fantasy swords that I've seen so far are either somewhat unremarkable because they're fairly close to originals, or they're so ridiculous. I mean, there are different types of ridiculous. There is the cool ridiculous, or whatever you want to call that. And then there is the stupid ridiculous. So that would be something with a crap load of weird spikes and hooks and serrations sticking out in all kinds of directions. Something that, endangers the user as much as the opponent. Stuff like that. But there are a few things. So first off, unrealistic fantasy stuff. I have kind of a soft spot for autonomous swords, if you will, be they possessed or some kind of spirit sword or something like that. So basically, it doesn't really matter what the sword looks like, how it's designed and everything, if you don't have to handle it yourself. If the sword swings itself, then it can be whatever, right? And it's pretty convenient if the sword goes to beat up your opponent without you having to do anything. So an example would be the sword familiar in Symphony of the Night, which looks a little silly, but again, what does it matter? The thing acts on its own. It'll just float towards the enemy and cut them. And you just stand there and be like, that's my sword, you go. So that's kind of cool. But otherwise, when it comes to swords that you actually handle yourself, now, I guess this is kind of my kryptonite. I like green glowy swords. So one of the things I came across is this thing here. Now, I would very much like to redesign it a little bit, make the handle maybe... it doesn't look too bad. It depends on whether it's round, though. If it's round, that's a no-go. But, the guard I would also redesign a little bit. And there are some things about it. But overall, I like the aesthetic. There's just something about this kind of crystal-looking green fluorescent stuff. While looking around, I came upon this picture here on DeviantArt. And that I do like. It looks pretty cool. Again, I would redesign a few things. For example, I would definitely get rid of that chain there that hangs from a leaf that grows out of the grip or something. So, yeah, all the leaves are a little weird, but overall, it's actually pretty cool. For one, it's magical. If you can have magic in a fantasy setting, then of course, why wouldn't you? And I like the overall shape. Like, it's large, but it's still slender. It's not like overly thick or ridiculously oversized or anything. It looks usable aside from the fact that, well, it's clearly magical. So it's unrealistic in that regard. But yeah, I like it. It looks pretty good. So yeah, things like this. Now we get to realistic fantasy swords that I like. Now, first one is kind of an honorable mention, I suppose. Something made by Jody Sampson, who was a very famous sword maker who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. But this was something, the Martian longsword from the John Carter series. I just said longsword. It's called that, but it's definitely not a longsword, not even close. So this is really more of a fantasy saber / cutlass, something like that. And it looks kind of neat. I like the hilt. The blade is definitely slimmer than I would like. It would limit its effectiveness at cutting, but overall, not too bad. And then actually fantasy scimitars seem to have the highest chance of appealing to me. Here is one that I just found randomly. I have no idea who made it or anything, but I like it. I would personally, I would give it more of a recurve, like more of an S shape, also towards the handle. But the way it looks, I like it. It's pretty good. And then this is probably my favorite. Like, if I had to pick one realistic fantasy sword, it would probably be this or one of these two. Okay, so one is this Khopesh Great Sword. It's a pretty interesting design. So It looks like a German greatsword in terms of the grip and pommel. The guard, I would really like to straighten out a little bit. Like, that is too strongly curved, like to the point where it can't fulfill its purpose as a guard as well as it should. So that really needs to be less extremely curved. But otherwise, I like the idea of having that sickle blade on there. And if you look at the point, it's still in line with the blade, so you could still thrust well with it. Very interesting, cool looking design that I think would work, as said, provided that you modify the guard. The other one, the very long handled scimitar, it's a little strange how long the handle is, but I still like the aesthetic. So that's the kind of thing that I can very much appreciate. Okay, next question. What do we have? Would you consider creating a video on how to create the tool/weapons from your flint knapping? Yeah. So, yeah, I definitely plan to do more of that. I did 2 videos on flint knapping recently, and as I get better, I plan to do more videos on that and make more stuff. And yes, that's certainly planned. So, pretty short answer there. Also, could we get an update on the fate of Skull Cave? I assume that due to the vote, you will be putting all gaming videos on the main channel. Just want to confirm. Yes, that is true. I did the survey, and people were in favor of doing the occasional gaming video on the main channel and not splitting up the content, which suits me quite well because it saves me time and is more efficient and all of that. So yeah, it's pretty much on ice indefinitely. I don't know if I'll ever do anything more with that channel. You never know. I might suddenly start using it for something else entirely, but I don't know. Doesn't seem likely at the moment. Next question. If you're holding a shield due to your actual weapons weapons being disarmed or otherwise unavailable, is there anything you can do to gain the upper hand in a fight, / are there any good courses of action? Let's say your opponent has a weapon but no shield. Well, if you end up with just your shield, there are still things you can do. I mean, you still have the defensive capabilities of the shield. Of course, you can also strike with the shield. It is more limited compared to a weapon. You're not going to do as much damage generally. It's not going to be as effective as a weapon. But there are still things you can do. I mean, for one, you could potentially brace the shield with your main hand as well, and then really go in and, just push their attack aside, or, you could even do a hard block against something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, and then you can potentially, when you get into grappling range and you block their weapon, you then have the option to use wrestling techniques, or you might even be able to wrench their sword from them. I mean, you could clobber them in the head with the rim of the shield, potentially. There are options. It's not ideal. It's certainly, better to have a weapon with a shield. But, if it came to that, then yes, that would still be viable. And then we've got, could you talk about poisons used on weapons? It's often portrayed in movies, video games, etc., but was it ever used in history? I don't think I've heard about it before. Oh yes, absolutely, a lot. In fact, I got an entire book on the topic that one of my subscribers sent me. It's not just about that, but yes, poisons in antiquity were used quite a bit. They were very much frowned upon. It's the ancient equivalent of dirty weapons nowadays, chemical warfare, biological warfare, and that's kind of what it is, if you think about it. There were lots of ways of extracting poisons from plants, animals, all kinds of things. So weapons would sometimes be coated, especially arrows. That was a common thing to do. And blow guns, of course. I mean, blow darts really only are efficient if they are coated in poison. So that was using toxic materials for that purpose. That was done all around the world throughout the ages. You find that anywhere from the Amazonian rainforest to, you know, as I said, ancient Greece. Medieval times, I'm not actually sure how common it was then, but I would be highly surprised if it wasn't used at all. So yes, it was actually quite common, just usually discouraged, depending on who you ask. Then final question, you clearly enjoy the process of filming and editing. Oh, do I? I don't actually enjoy editing. It's even as a technical and artistic enthusiasm rather than a means to produce content. I'm not actually sure what made you think that. To me, it really is actually a means to produce content. I'm not that much into the process itself of filming and editing. How long has this been a part of your life, and what is it about this process that so appeals to you? Well, I've been doing that since 2007, since I created the channel. So I've been doing that for a long time. And yeah, I said it doesn't really appeal a whole lot to me. So I would be interested to know what made you think that. But, you know, I guess it's fair to assume that if somebody does a lot of it, then they like it to an extent. But not necessarily. It depends on what it is, though. I mean, of course, when I'm filming the testing of weapons, that's fun, obviously. But the testing itself is fun, not the act of, you know, catching it on video, really. And that's everything I got. This video was a lot longer than I would have thought, especially considering there wasn't that many questions, but I guess I got rambly. Either way, thanks for asking the questions, and of course, thanks for your support on Patreon. By the way, if you're not even aware of the fact that I have a Patreon page, it's always listed in the video description, just all the way at the bottom where I have a bunch of links. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you found this entertaining.